The world, for me, was made of vellum and ink. It lived in the quiet, dusty air of the Silverwood Mapmakers Guild, a sanctuary fragrant with the scent of aging paper, beeswax, and the sharp tang of pigment. My universe was contained within these four walls, a place of comforting, predictable order. From my stool, I could trace the veins of creation with a mako shark quill, giving form to places I would never dare to visit. Today, it was the Dragon's Tooth Mountains. My hand was steady as I laid down a wash of ultramarine and crushed pearl for the snow-capped peaks, a range of jagged teeth said to rip the clouds as they passed. I knew their every ridge and valley, every rumored pass and hidden lake, not from experience, but from the dry, meticulous accounts in the Guild's library. I could render a perfect illusion of a place, but the thought of the biting wind or the treacherous scree slopes made my stomach clench. The maps were my world. The world itself was a terrifying, chaotic place. The bell above the door jangled, shattering the silence. "Elias, this is an outrage!" A voice like rocks in a barrel boomed through the shop. A portly merchant, red-faced and sputtering, slammed a rolled map down on the front counter. "The shipping lanes to the Coral Isles are completely wrong. My vessel nearly ran aground on a reef that isn't even marked." My shoulders instinctively drew towards my ears. My focus shattered. The Dragon's Tooth Range suddenly felt 1,000,000 miles away. I hunched over my work, pretending to be absorbed, hoping the man's fury would pass me by like a summer squall. "Now, Master Hemlock," a calm, reedy voice answered. My master, Elias, emerged from the back room, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose, his thin frame unperturbed by the merchant's bluster. "Let us have a look." While Elias smoothed things over with the gentle authority of his 70 years, I shrank further into myself. This was my failing. I had the talent, Elias always said, the eye for detail that could not be taught. But I lacked the spine. The world beyond my drawing board was loud and unpredictable, and my only defense was to make myself as small and unnoticeable as possible. My dream was to see the sun rise over the Jade Sea or to stand on the silent plains of Erador, but that dream was a faint whisper against the roar of my fear. Later, after the merchant had departed with a corrected map and a mollified grunt, Elias drifted over to my station. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. "Your lines are finer than ever, Finian," he said, his gaze appraising my work. "But a map is more than just lines. It's a story, and every story has its share of fantasy." He tapped a finger on an empty space in the corner of my parchment. "Tell me about the Whispering Compass." I recited the lesson by rote, my voice barely a murmur. "A cartographic myth, Master. A fairy tale. An artifact said to be crafted from the heartwood of a sun tree and a needle of fallen starlight. It points not to the magnetic north, but to the truth of the bearer's heart, to what it desires most. To their destiny," Elias corrected gently, a strange glint in his eye. He smiled, a crinkling of paper-thin skin around his eyes. "A fanciful notion, isn't it? Good for selling expensive, inaccurate novelties to rich fools." We shared a small, conspiratorial laugh, and the tension in my shoulders eased. It was just a story, a piece of guild lore. That night, as I was sweeping the floor before heading up to my small room above the shop, I saw Elias at the great oak cabinet where he kept the rarest pigments and oldest parchments. He was not storing supplies. In his hands he held a small, ornate wooden box no bigger than a book. It was carved with interlocking spirals I'd never seen before. With a care that bordered on reverence, he placed it into a hidden compartment, his movements slow and deliberate. The soft, final click of the lock sounded unnaturally loud in the evening quiet. I finished my work and climbed the stairs to my room. The memory of Elias's strange seriousness fought with his earlier dismissal of the fairy tale. But I pushed it away. It was easier that way. Downstairs, the maps of the world slept in their neat, ordered rolls. The unknown could stay on the page. Here, within these four walls, I was safe. The storm broke over Silverwood just after midnight, a furious assault of wind and water. It was the kind of tempest that rattled the very bones of the city, and from my bed, I listened to it rage. The windows of my small room groaned in their frames, and rain lashed the glass like a fistful of pebbles. Sleep was impossible. Thunder, deep and guttural, seemed to shake the guild to its foundations. It was not the thunder, however, that sent a jolt of pure ice through my veins. It was a different sound from the workshop below, a splintering crash followed by the heavy thud of a falling body. My breath hitched. My first thought was of a clumsy apprentice knocking over a rack of scrolls, but we had no other apprentices. There was only me. My second thought was of burglars, and my body went rigid with fear. I crept from my bed, my bare feet silent on the cold floorboards, and edged my way to the top of the stairs. The scene below was a nightmare rendered in flickering lantern light. The front door was ajar, swinging on one hinge, letting in the howling wind and sheets of rain. Sprawled on the floor was a man cloaked in dark, sodden rags, and standing over him was Elias, his face pale and grim. The man on the floor pushed himself to one elbow, his breath a ragged gasp. "They're in the city," he wheezed, blood flecking his lips. "The shadows they hunt." Before Elias could answer, the world dissolved into chaos. It wasn't a sound that came next, but a sudden, violent absence of it. The rain-streaked windows on the far side of the shop didn't just break, they imploded, shattering inward with a silent, concussive force. Through the empty frames flowed not men, but shapes. They were voids in the stormy darkness, things of pure shadow that moved with an unnatural liquid grace. There was a low hiss of displaced air, an acrid smell of cold magic, and then they were inside. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. One of the shadows flowed toward the wounded man, who let out a strangled cry before he was enveloped and silenced. My own scream died in my throat, a knot of pure terror. "Finian!" Elias's voice cut through my paralysis. He wasn't looking at the invaders. He was looking at me. In a flash of movement faster than I'd ever seen from him, he spun to the great oak cabinet, unlocked the hidden compartment, and pulled out the ornate wooden box. He lunged towards the stairs, his eyes wild with an urgency that terrified me more than the shadows. "Miwan!" He shoved the box into my hands. It was cool and smooth, the wood humming with a faint, almost imperceptible vibration. His grip on my arms was like iron. "It's real, Finian. The compass," he commanded, his voice a desperate, raw thing I had never heard. "All the legends are true. It must not fall into his hands. Lord Malakor's agents are here for it. Take it to the sunken city of Eridor. Go!" His hands. It was always his hands I'd admired, steady, delicate, capable of creating worlds with a single graceful line. Now they trembled with frantic energy. The shadows were closing in, their movements economical and without sound. Elias was cornered. He grabbed a heavy iron map stand, a pathetic weapon against the encroaching darkness. He saw the frozen horror on my face, the leaden weight in my feet. My body was a traitor, refusing every command. "The passage, Finian!" he roared, his final words to me. "Behind the vellum racks! Run!" That broke the spell. As one of the shadows lunged for Elias, I turned and scrambled, clumsy with panic, toward the back of the shop. I fumbled behind the heavy rolls of parchment, my fingers finding the familiar knot in the wood that sprung the secret door. It swung inward, revealing a black, musty-smelling hole. I threw myself inside, pulling the door shut just as I heard a sickening thud and a final, choked-off gasp from my master. I was alone in the pitch black, the wooden box clutched to my chest like a shield. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drumbeat of survival. My first instinct, my only instinct, was not to run to some mythical sunken city. It was to find the city guard. To find someone in a uniform, with a sword and a shield and a brain for violence. I would hand them this cursed box and let them deal with it. This wasn't my burden. This wasn't my fight. I was just a mapmaker, not a hero. I was just Finian, and my world had just been burned to the ground. The secret passage was a suffocating tube of damp earth and stone, smelling of mildew and century-old secrets. I stumbled through the blackness, my only guide the rough-hewn wall under my trembling fingertips. The ornate box was a cold, hard weight against my chest. Every scuttling rat was a shadow agent. Every drip of water was the sound of pursuit. My mind, a frantic engine of panic, clung to a single, desperate plan. Find the undertunnels, follow them to the garrison barracks, and thrust this cursed inheritance into the hands of the city guard. This was their problem. They had swords and armor. I had ink-stained fingers and a crippling fear of loud noises. A sus crea consur, hours crawled by. The air grew stale, thick with the smell of sewage and decay. Finally, I saw it, a faint, gray line of light beneath a heavy iron grate. Hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, fluttered in my chest. Prying the grate open with shaking hands, I squeezed through the narrow gap and tumbled onto a cobblestone alleyway, gasping in the cool morning air. The sky was a canvas of bruised purple and soft pearl, heralding the dawn, but something was wrong. The air was thick, not with the usual morning sense of baking bread and damp stone, but with the acrid stench of scorched wood and burned paper. My heart sank. I crept to the end of the alley and peered out, my breath caught in my throat, a dry, painful knot. A thick plume of greasy black smoke coiled into the sky, rising from the heart of the guild district. From my district, from my home, dread propelled me forward. I ran, heedless of the few early risers who stared at my disheveled state. I didn't stop until I stood before the ruin. The Silverwood Mapmakers Guild was gone. In its place stood a blackened skeleton of charred beams and collapsed masonry, still sighing smoke into the dawn. The sign, with its beautifully rendered compass rose, lay splintered in the street. I could see the ghosts of maps, the spirits of vellum and ink, curling away into the morning air as ash. A horrifying realization crashed down on me, heavier than any stone. They hadn't come just for the compass. They had come to erase its very memory, to burn away every record, every map, every person who knew of its existence. That included Elias. That included the wounded stranger. And that included me. Handing this box to the city guard would be a death sentence. There was no going back. My old life, my safe, ordered world, had been reduced to cinder. I stumbled away, a ghost in my own city, and found refuge in the anonymity of a grimy stable near the western gate. Huddled in the hay, shivering with cold and grief, I tried to think, but my thoughts were a tangled, useless mess. "You're Elias's boy." The voice was low and gravelly. I flinched, scrambling back into the hay, my hand clutching the box. A man emerged from the shadows of a horse stall. He was tall and broad, with a grizzled beard and a latticework of old scars across one side of his face. His eyes were like chips of flint. I didn't recognize him at first, but then I saw the weary set of his shoulders and knew. He was a man I had occasionally seen lingering in the corner of the Drunken Dragon Tavern, watching, always watching. "He was a friend," the man said, his voice softer now. "My name is Theron. I was a warden. My order was sworn to guard men like Elias and the artifacts they protected. I failed him." He looked towards the smoke-stained sky, his jaw tight with guilt. "But I will not fail his memory." He knelt, his movements careful, as if approaching a spooked animal. "That box," he said, nodding towards my chest. "You think Malachor wants it. You're wrong. He wants what it leads to. The sunken city of Erador. It isn't just a myth. It's a vault. And inside that vault is Lord Malakor's phylactery, the source of his immortality, the anchor for his power. Without it, he can be destroyed. With it, he left the rest unsaid. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Elias's strange lecture, his reverence for the box, his final, desperate command. This wasn't a simple theft. It was the beginning of a war one couldn't comprehend. "I can't," I whispered, the words tasting of ash. "I'm a mapmaker." "Elias knew that," Theron said, his flinty eyes meeting mine. "And he chose you. You can't do this alone, boy, but you are the keeper of that compass now. I can get you out of this city, but the path ahead is long and it is not safe." He stood and offered me a calloused hand. I looked from his hand to the wooden box, then back at the morning sky, now tainted by the funeral pyre of my former life. Reluctantly feeling the weight of a duty I never asked for, I took his hand and let him pull me to my feet. Our journey began not with a stride of courage, but with a fugitive's flight, leaving the smoldering remains of all I had ever known behind. The Whisperwood did not welcome us. It swallowed us. The moment we passed under its gnarled, moss-choked canopy, the world changed. The air grew thick and heavy, and a low, susurrant sound filled the space between the trees, a constant murmur like 1,000 secrets being told at once. Theron led the way, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword, his scarred face a mask of grim determination. Rese. This was no ordinary forest. Paths that had been clear moments before would suddenly be choked with thorny, black-vined briars. The dappled sunlight on the forest floor shifted and swirled, playing tricks on the eye, until east looked like west. After half a day of circling back on ourselves for the third time, Theron's patience, already a shallow well, ran dry. He let out a roar of frustration and kicked a gnarled root that seemed to have deliberately tripped him. "This is witchery," he spat, glaring at the woods as if it were a mortal enemy he could intimidate. "We need a clear heading, but the sun lies, and the moss grows on all sides of these cursed trees." He was right. Brute force was useless here. My own fear, a constant companion, was beginning to give way to a different sensation. Familiarity. The disorienting landscape felt like a puzzle, a map whose legend was written in a language only I could read. "Wait," I said, my voice quiet. Theron grunted, barely listening. "The ground," I continued, a little louder. "It has a slope, almost imperceptible, but it's there. It's draining southeast. Old survey maps of the region showed a tributary of the Greywater River starts in these hills. If we follow the watershed, it should keep us on a straight course, regardless of what the paths do." I also pointed to a specific type of phosphorescent lichen clinging to the bark. "And that fungus, it only grows in deep shadow. It's clustered on the northwestern faces of the trees, away from the true afternoon sun, not the one the forest is showing us." Theron stared at me, his flinty eyes wide for a fraction of a second. He looked from the lichen to the slope of the ground, then back to me. He didn't offer praise, but a slow, grudging nod was more valuable than any compliment. For the first time he let me take the lead. My knowledge, born in the dusty quiet of the guild, had found its purpose in the wild. We emerged from the Whisperwood 2 days later, exhausted and filthy, into the chaotic squalor of Mudstone. It wasn't a town so much as a collection of ramshackle buildings leaning against each other for support, all of it mired in ankle-deep mud. It was an outpost for trappers, deserters, and sellswords, a place where a sharp knife was worth more than a good name. In the center of the settlement's only tavern, the Rusted Mug, a crowd was gathered around a knife-throwing contest. A bull-necked man with ham-sized fists took his shot, his knife thudding a good 2 inches from the bullseye. His opponent, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a smirk that looked permanently etched on her face, stepped up. Just as her rival bent to retrieve his blade, she casually kicked the post holding the target. It was a subtle, perfectly timed jolt. Her own knife flew true, sinking dead center into the now quivering target. She pocketed the winnings with a wink to the disgruntled loser. "Her," Theron muttered. "She'll do." He approached her as she was counting her coins. "We need a guide through the mirror marshes," he said, his voice low. "We can pay." She looked us up and down, her gaze lingering on my worn-out clothes and Theron's warden-like severity. "The mirror marshes?" she scoffed, her voice a wry, mocking drawl. "You two don't look like you're on a holiday. You look like you're running from something nasty. That's a suicide mission, and my rates for suicide are prohibitively expensive." Before Theron could bargain, the tavern doors burst open. It was them. Two of the silent, shadow-clad figures from the guild. Panic seized me, cold and absolute. Theron drew his sword with a roar, meeting the first one's silent attack. Patrons screamed and scattered. The woman, Brenna, as I'd heard someone call her, drew a pair of wicked-looking daggers, her playful smirk replaced by a predator's snarl as the second agent flowed towards her. I was useless, backed into a corner, my heart hammering. The shadow advanced on Brenna, its movements impossibly fast. My eyes darted around, landing on an oil lantern hanging from a low beam and a large, dry tapestry depicting a forgotten battle. An idea, born of desperation and a mapmaker's ability to see connections, sparked in my mind. I grabbed the lantern, swung it hard against the wall, and hurled the flaming, oil-soaked wreck into the tapestry. The dry threads erupted in a wall of fire. The shadow agent recoiled from the sudden heat and light, momentarily blinded. It was the opening Brenna needed. She moved like a viper, her daggers flashing, and dispatched the creature with a brutal efficiency that stole my breath. Theron had already finished his. In the sudden, smoky silence, Brenna stared at the dissolving wisps of black smoke that were all that remained of our attackers. Then she looked at the box I still clutched, then at me. The mercenary glint in her eyes was now mixed with a dangerous curiosity. "All right," she said, wiping her blade on her trousers. "You've got my attention. My price just doubled." The mirror marshes were a liar's paradise. Unlike the Whisperwood, which actively tried to deceive you with magic, the marshes accomplished the same feat with nothing more than stagnant water and an uncaring sky. Every shallow pool was a perfect, silvered reflection of the clouds above, making it impossible to tell where solid ground ended and treacherous, bottomless water began. The air was heavy with the smell of decay and the drone of insects, a flat, desolate expanse that promised to swallow travelers whole. Our progress was agonizingly slow, and our guide, the Whispering Compass, had gone mad. For days, the needle had been a reliable if mysterious friend. Now, it spun like a drunken dancer, swinging wildly from one direction to another before settling into a useless, quivering dance in the center of its housing. "Useless trinket," Theron grumbled for the 10th time, snatching the box from my hands. He gave it a hard shake, as if he could physically intimidate it into submission. "Elias swore by this thing, but it's leading us to our graves." Brenna, poling our flat-bottomed skiff through a channel of brackish water, let out a dry laugh. "Maybe it's telling you the truth. Maybe every direction out here is a grave." She glanced at the box with disdain. "I'll stick to the stars, thanks. They don't have mood swings." But the sky was a featureless gray slate, and I knew we were lost. I watched the frantic needle, my own anxiety mirroring its chaotic dance. Theron's frustration and Brenna's cynicism were chipping away at my fragile hope. I closed my eyes, trying to block it all out, and in the quiet darkness of my mind, I heard my master's voice. A fanciful notion, isn't it? To point not north, but to the truth of the bearer's heart, to their destiny. My eyes snapped open. Destiny. Not a location. Not a landmark or a magnetic pole. My heart's desire right now was simply to survive. To get away. To be anywhere but here. The compass wasn't broken. It was reflecting my own terrified, directionless heart. It was a judge, not a tool, and it had judged me unworthy. "It's not for me," I whispered, the words so soft I barely heard them myself. Theron stopped shaking the box and stared at me. "What are you muttering about, boy?" "The legend," I said, my voice gaining strength as the idea took root. "Elias and we talked about it. It points to what the heart desires most. To a person's destiny. It isn't pointing the way for me, because this isn't my destiny. I'm just the delivery boy." My gaze shifted to Brenna, who had paused her polling to listen, an eyebrow arched in amusement. "Brenna," I said, my heart suddenly pounding with a strange certainty. "Hold this," she scoffed. "What, you think my charming personality is going to fix it?" But she set her pole down and took the box from Theron. The moment her fingers closed around the carved wood, the spinning needle stopped. It gave one final, decisive shudder and then locked into place, pointing with unwavering stillness towards a cluster of half-submerged ruins looming in the mist to the southeast. The silence in the skiff was absolute, broken only by the hum of insects. Brenna stared at the compass, her face pale, the usual mask of cynical humor stripped away. "How?" she breathed. She slowly unlaced the leather bracer on her right forearm. There, stark against her skin, was a birthmark, an intricate spiral with a single dot at its center. It was a symbol I knew intimately. I had seen it just days ago, carved into the lid of the very box she now held. "My grandmother used to tell me it was the mark of a fallen star," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "A story to make a strange girl feel special. She said our family was from a city that the waters had swallowed, the sunken city of Erador. She was a descendant of its guardians. This wasn't just a job for her anymore. It was a birthright. The quest had found its true master. The revelation shifted everything. I was no longer a frightened boy clutching a package. I was the one who had solved the puzzle. But our moment of quiet awe was shattered by a chilling hiss from behind us. A figure rose from the marsh, coalescing from the mist and mud. It was larger than the agents in the tavern, armored in what looked like solidified shadow, and it radiated an aura of cold, commanding malice. Malakor's top lieutenant. Panic flared in my gut, hot and familiar. But this time, something else rose with it. Insight. My cartographer's eyes didn't just see an enemy. They saw the battlefield. I saw the shimmering patch of water that hid a deep pool, the narrow strip of solid ground, the patch of sucking peat that looked deceptively firm. "Brenna, draw him to the right," I yelled, my voice sharp, with an authority I didn't know I possessed. "Theron, circle left. The ground is unstable there. He's too heavy for it." They reacted instantly, a flicker of surprise on Theron's face giving way to grim acceptance. Brenna, moving with deadly grace, feinted towards the treacherous peat bog. The lieutenant, focused on her as the compass-bearer, lunged. Just as I'd predicted, his armored weight broke through the thin crust of earth, and he sank to his knees in the thick, grasping mud. It was all the opening Theron needed. His sword flashed, and Brenna's daggers found their mark. Together, they dispatched the creature. As its form dissolved back into shadow and mist, the three of us stood breathing heavily, a true team for the first time. The compass, still steady in Brenna's hand, pointed the way forward, no longer a burden, but a legacy. The compass led us with unerring purpose through the final, treacherous maze of the Mirror Marshes. The ruins grew larger, more defined, rising from the stagnant water like the bones of some colossal, forgotten beast. Finally, we arrived at a massive, circular stone gateway, half submerged in green water and choked with vines. The spiral sigil from the compass in Brenna's arm was carved above the lintel, a silent, ancient welcome, the entrance to the sunken city of Erador. We stood at the precipice of our quest, a moment of tense, quiet victory. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. But the silence was a lie. It began with a ripple in the water, then another, and another, until the entire marsh around us was churning. From the depths rose slick, dark forms, creatures of nightmare, with too many limbs and eyes that glowed with a malevolent green light. They were Malakor's hounds, a horde of them, skittering across the surface of the water with unnatural speed, their chittering cries echoing across the desolate landscape. Behind them, more of the shadow-armored lieutenants materialized from the mist. We were ambushed, hopelessly outnumbered. "Get to the gate!" Theron roared, drawing his heavy sword. The steel sang as it left its scabbard. "Now!" Brenna grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the entrance. "He's right, Finian. We have to go." But I was frozen, watching as Theron positioned himself squarely in the center of the causeway, a lone bastion of flesh and steel against a tide of darkness. He met the first wave of creatures with a brutal, cleaving blow, his face a mask of furious resolve. He was not just fighting, he was buying us seconds. He glanced back, his scarred face grim, his eyes meeting mine one last time. There was no fear in them, only a profound and terrible certainty. "I failed my order once," he shouted over the din of battle. "I will not fail again!" He saw the hesitation on our faces, the shared horror at the thought of leaving him. "Go! The compass must reach its destination!" He shoved a massive stone that was part of a crumbling wall, and it crashed down onto the causeway, momentarily blocking the path. It wouldn't hold them for long. He turned to face the renewed onslaught, a wild, defiant roar ripping from his throat. "The warden's duty is fulfilled!" That was the last thing we heard him say. Brenna dragged me through the gateway just as the horde swarmed over him, a wave of shadow and teeth and screeching hatred. We watched for one horrifying second as his sword flashed, then faltered, then was submerged in the tide of bodies. Then the darkness inside the city swallowed us, and the sounds of the battle faded behind a heavy stone door that ground shut with a sound of utter finality. The blow was devastating. Theron, the gruff, unkillable warden, was gone. Grief, raw and sharp, tore through me. Brenna leaned against the cold stone, her face pale, her knuckles white where she gripped her daggers. There were no words. There was only the heavy, shared weight of his sacrifice. We pressed on, our grim purpose now tinged with vengeance. We moved through silent, waterlogged halls, following the compass's steady pull until we reached the heart of the sunken city. It was a vast, circular chamber, breathtaking in its scale. But there was no phylactery, no dark altar, no weapon to wield against a rising evil. In the center of the chamber stood a single, immense crystal, pulsating with a soft, internal light. It was beautiful and terrible, and I knew in an instant that we had made a catastrophic mistake. This wasn't a vault, it was a prison. A low, resonant laugh echoed through the chamber, seeming to come from the stones themselves. A great shadow detached itself from the far wall, coalescing into a towering, indistinct form. It was not a physical being, but an immense, dreadful projection of power and ancient malice. Lord Malakor. "Fools!" His voice boomed, a sound that vibrated deep in my bones. "Did you truly believe I could not find my own prison? I did not need your compass to locate this place. I needed it to open it." He laughed again, a sound of pure, triumphant evil. The key was never the box. It was the blood of the guardians who locked me away all those millennia ago. As he spoke, tendrils of dark magic lashed out from his shadowy form, seizing Brenna. She cried out, her body lifted into the air, her limbs rigid. She was pulled inexorably toward the glowing crystal, the birthmark on her arm flaring with a painful, brilliant light. Her life force, her very essence, was being siphoned, not to be consumed, but to be used as a key, a resonant frequency, to shatter the ancient prison from within. Loa. All was lost. Theron was dead for nothing. Brenna was captured. Our entire quest had been a lie, a carefully orchestrated gambit by the very evil we sought to stop. I stood alone, a mapmaker in the heart of a trap, about to witness the unleashing of ultimate darkness upon the world. And it was all my fault. Despair was a cold, physical weight in the vast chamber. Theron's sacrifice, Brenna's agony, my own catastrophic foolishness. It all coalesced into a symphony of failure with me as its terrified conductor. Malakor's laughter was the sound of my world ending. I watched, paralyzed, as Brenna's body convulsed, the light from the great crystal growing harsher, brighter, on the verge of shattering. I was a mapmaker who had led his friends to their doom. I had read the signs all wrong. My gaze fell away from the horrifying scene, down to the floor, unable to watch. And that's when I saw it. My mind, conditioned by years of meticulous work, saw what my fear had blinded me to. The intricate patterns etched into the stone floor weren't mere decoration. They were lines of power, channels, conduits. They flowed from the walls, converged on the crystal prison, and spiraled outward again, in a complex, interlocking web. It was a map, a schematic of immense magical power. In that instant, everything I had ever learned, every lesson from Elias on topographical flow, every tedious hour spent tracing the energy ley lines of mythical places, every map I had ever drawn, it all clicked into a single thunderous moment of clarity. I couldn't fight Malakor with a sword. I couldn't match his power. But he was a being of pure force, of brute strength magic. I was a cartographer. I understood systems. I could fight him with knowledge. A new resolve, sharp and clear as a newly cut quill, sliced through my terror. I scrambled for my satchel, my clumsy fingers fumbling inside. Not for a weapon, but for my tools. I found what I needed, a stick of white marking chalk, the kind I used for rough sketches on slate. While Malakor's immense shadowy form remained focused on Brenna, on the exquisite moment of his victory, I dropped to my knees. The floor was cold and smooth beneath my hands. With frantic, desperate energy, I began to draw. I wasn't trying to break the prison, I was rerouting it. My chalk stick flew across the stone, creating new lines, diverting the flow of the glowing conduits. I bisected a major channel here, created a new junction there, turning his perfect circuit into a feedback loop. It was desperate geometry, a cartographer's gambit to turn the prison's own energy against the jailer. A gnat, drawing lines in the dust, Malakor's voice boomed, amused. But then the amusement died. The light from the crystal flickered. He turned his terrible, formless gaze upon me, and for the first time I felt the full weight of his ancient rage. "You!" Shadowy tendrils, fast as striking snakes, lashed out from his form. I threw myself to the side, the tendril cracking the stone where I had been kneeling. I scrambled up, dodging another, my mind racing faster than it ever had. I was no warrior, but I saw the angles, the trajectories. I dodged and lunged, my chalk stick never stopping, connecting one last line. The new circuit was almost complete. It just needed an anchor. An input. "Brenna!" I screamed, my voice raw. "Fight him! Don't let him use you! Anchor your power! Not to the crystal, to the new sigil, my sigil!" Through the haze of her pain, her eyes met mine. Understanding, fierce and defiant, flashed within them. She let out a raw scream, not of agony, but of pure, focused will. The torrent of her life force, her guardian's heritage, shifted. Instead of feeding the crystal, she wrenched it sideways, pouring it into the new path I had drawn on the floor. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The chalk lines flared with blinding white light. The entire chamber screamed with the sound of tearing reality as the rerouted energy, with nowhere to go, slammed back into its source. The prison, instead of shattering, imploded. Malakor's shadowy form was caught in the vortex, his triumphant laughter turning into a shriek of disbelief as he was torn apart, his essence sucked violently inward into the heart of the crystal. A final, blinding flash of light, and then silence. The great crystal no longer pulsed with violent energy. Instead, it glowed with a soft, steady, and eternal light. The threat was not destroyed, but it was contained, sealed once more. The silence that fell upon the sunken city was absolute. A profound quiet that felt heavier than any sound. The great crystal prison, now Malakor's tomb, cast a soft, peaceful glow across the chamber, its light glinting off the damp stone and my hastily drawn chalk lines. The air, once thick with malice, was now just cool and still. Brenna crumpled to the floor, the dark magic releasing its hold. I rushed to her side, my heart pounding with the aftershock of our victory. I helped her sit up, her body trembling with exhaustion. She was pale and weak, but she was alive. "You did it, Finian," she whispered, her voice rough. She looked from my face to the glowing crystal, then to the mess of chalk on the floor. A slow, weary smile touched her lips. The cartographer's gambit, E.H. We sat there for a long time, sharing a moment of exhausted, grief-tinged triumph. The weight of Theron's sacrifice settled between us, a silent, painful tribute. He hadn't died in vain. His final stand had bought us the time, the seconds I needed to see the truth. His duty was fulfilled, and so, in a way, was ours. Then Tudzbaya Hyena Kohain. When we finally emerged from the sunken ruins of Eridor, blinking in the bright light of a new day, the world felt strangely unchanged. There was no parade waiting for us, no king to offer us medals. The sky was the same blue, the sun just as warm. The only witnesses to our deed were the silent marshes and the memory of the man we'd left behind. The world had been saved, but it would never know it. And we, the saviors, were irrevocably altered. The journey back to Silverwood was a quiet one. The city, once my entire world, now felt different. Smaller. When we stood before the ruin of the Mapmakers Guild, I felt not the crushing despair of my loss, but a quiet, firm resolve. Ash could be cleared away. Foundations could be rebuilt. I did not rebuild the guild as a simple shop. Using the last of Elias's hidden funds and what was left of Brenna's considerable payment, we began to construct something new. It was a library, a workshop, and a fortress of knowledge all in one. We gathered what few scattered texts had survived the fire, and I began the painstaking work of recreating the lost maps from memory. It was no longer just a place to sell parchment and ink. It became a repository for the hidden truths of the world, a bastion against the darkness we knew lurked just beyond the edges of the known. In our own quiet way, we were founding a new order of wardens, one built on knowledge and vigilance, not just swords and oaths. Brenna, to my surprise, stayed. She had found a purpose deeper than a bag of gold. Her heritage was tied to this fight, and she became the guild's protector, her sharp eyes and even sharper daggers, a promise that no shadow would ever breach these walls again. Months passed. The new guild was filled with the familiar scents of paper and wax, but now mingled with the smell of fresh-cut timber and Brenna's steel-honing oil. One evening I unrolled a large, fresh piece of vellum on the main work table. It was a map of the known world, meticulously drawn, but this time I left the vast, unexplored continents and the endless stretches of ocean blank. They were huge, empty spaces, marked only with a single, elegant word: uncharted. Across the table, Brenna looked up from the whetstone where she was sharpening one of her knives. She saw the empty spaces on my map, the challenge in them, and a slow, familiar smirk spread across her face. I picked up my quill, dipping it into the pot of fresh ink. For the first time in my life, I looked at the vast, empty canvas of the unknown, and I felt no fear. There was no anxiety, no knot in my stomach. There was only the quiet, thrilling hum of purpose. My world was no longer contained within four walls. It was as big as the parchment before me, and it was waiting to be written. My next journey was about to begin.